everyone, welcome to Class 8. The topic is Decisions about Work-Life Programs. In today's seminar we're looking at what are work-life programs. We're going through the logic model of work-life programs, talking about the barriers to their success and how to enhance this success, flexible work arrangements, analytics issues, and of course a class exercise. So here's some revision from Seminar 7, some of the terms we looked at. This seminar looked at employee attitudes and their link to organisational outcomes. The things that we looked at were organisational commitment, being effective continuance and normative commitment as some of the aspects, also looking at employee engagement and job satisfaction and the different facets. So what are work-life programs? Work-life programs, according to Cassio and Boudreau, include any employer-sponsored benefit or working condition that helps an employee to enhance the fit between work and non-work demands, page 171. So quite a broad definition of these programs. But what exactly are they? So here you can see on the slide they are things like child and dependent care programs, flexible work conditions, leave options, information services and HR policies, and organisational cultural issues. So benefits may include part-time away from work, such as parental leave. Conditions may include flexible work arrangements such as a bank of hours, teleworking, or working unusual hours, or working shifts, for example. Basically any arrangement that helps the employee to juggle the requirement of work with aspects of life outside of work. In Australia, the Fair Work Act requires that enterprise agreements include a flexibility clause, which ensures that at least some conditions have an element of flexible arrangements. The current government is considering ways in which that can be strengthened, so we can expect more varied conditions in the workplace in the future. But this does not only relate to individuals, it also relates to conditions that affect a number of employees or even the entire workforce of an employer. Just as a sidebar, the question of paid parental leave is currently being debated in Australia. The National Employment Standards, Fair Work, provides for 12 months of unpaid parental leave to an employee who has completed at least 12 months of service. So at the moment there is still plenty of room to move for employers in terms of what they can provide above what is required through enterprise agreements. Of course, they do not want to do that because of the uncertainty around what the government will legislate. If the government legislates across the board for all employers, it means that this cannot be used as a benefit to attract talent. What about emergency backup childcare for sick children? You'd have a think about it. Do you know of any backup childcare employer providers in Australia or WA? First, let's look at the logic model that Cassio and Boudreau present for work-life programs. Again, it's an upside-down version of the human capital bridge. In this model, you can see the firm's inputs in terms of investments in work-life programs such as benefits, conditions, flexibility, information, and resources. These then need to be communicated to employees, ingrained in the culture, supported by management, and training needs to occur so that managers and supervisors understand how to support employees with these things. This then leads to greater quality of work life for employees, which in turn results in reduced stress, reduced burnout, reduced work-life conflict, and from here we see attitude changes such as improvements to job satisfaction, commitment and employee engagement. This leads to changes at the workplace level in terms of becoming an employer of choice and thus improved staffing quality, lower absenteeism and therefore reduced costs of absenteeism, lower turnover and associated costs, and better work and career behaviours and thus increased performance and service. Now I want to add a bit more detail to the mechanisms in this figure 7.1 from your textbook. Let me just add these red arrows. Let me just add these red arrows. So these red arrows are also what I think are some of the direct links that the model doesn't show. So note in their logic model for work-life programs, they have everything working through attitudes. But if we take a more pragmatic and a less psychological view of these effects, we can see some other mechanisms. Take recruiting as an employer of choice, for example. That may follow from reputation distributed by word of mouth from existing employees or from information provided on the web or other forms of recruitment about these benefits, and this may make them more visible and enhance the prospect of attracting applicants. These benefits may also help us to clinch the deal with potential hires, so they do not necessarily work just through affecting the attitudes of existing employees. What about programs that enable employees to avoid or make up unexpected absences, such as emergency childcare or time banking systems? As well as the effect on attitudes, these have a simple direct effect on the number of staff that we have to budget for. They are not absent. Yes, that has the side benefit of being less stressful for employees, but that is not what has caused the reduction in the absence. While the reduced stress will improve attitudes, it's the practical access to emergency childcare that increases attendance, and the increased attendance reduces absenteeism costs. So this is the second red arrow, the one to the right. So your book talks a little bit about work-life programs and professional employees, and how these work-life programs can be effective at attracting and retaining employees, and especially retaining top-performing professionals. Some employees may opt out of the workforce to have families, clearly, and therefore there is a loss of skill from the workplace if these workers do not return. This may be a personal choice, or it might be due to an unsupportive work environment. Some may return as part-time workers. Either way, there is a loss of talent and an increased chance of turnover, which, as we know, is costly. Others who do not opt out may have increased stress due to work-family conflict, and they are more likely to quit. There may be more mistakes made at work. However, supportive workplaces will likely be rewarded with greater job satisfaction and commitment from their employees. We need to be aware of spillover from work to home or home to work, which, if negative, can be related to lower job satisfaction and life satisfaction, and can impact well-being. Cascio and Boudreau identify 6 main barriers to an employee using a work-life program. So this identifies problems not with the organisation providing programs, but with employees using them, with their uptake. First, lack of communication. So if you don't know about a program, you can't use it. So we need to make sure that there is good communication to employees about these programs. Second, high workloads may mean that there's no point taking off to engage in a work-life program, as our workload is building up, and when you come back to, you don't want to come back to a pile of work. So this can be a problem and a barrier. Third, if management is not supportive of employees, employees may be unwilling to participate in a particular program, as this may be seen as a lack of commitment to their work. Fourth, there might be career repercussions where employees feel that if they engage in a work-life program, their career progression might suffer. This may only be a belief, or it might be reality, but it certainly still needs to be addressed. Fifth, peer pressure may mean that an employee does not want to engage in a work-life program, as they might be branded as not being a team player or slacking off. Sixth, the administrative process, meaning the paperwork side of things, may be so excessive and such a long process that it turns employees away. Therefore, if an organisation is committed to providing a work-life program, they can't simply just provide them and think employees will automatically use them. They need to make sure that the workplace culture supports these programs and encourages their use, and that the process to apply for the programs is streamlined, easy to use, easy to apply for, and that managers and supervisors are supportive, and that they're trained on how to support and encourage their employees to use the programs. So furthermore, if we're looking at enhancing the success, we have some key factors here that Cascio and Boudreau identify, such as careful alignment with strategic objectives, the extent and quality of communication, training, and management and supervisory support, as I've discussed. Another important thing to think about, I think, is, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? What is the main reason for offering the work-life program? And clearly different reasons involve different program offerings. I've put some potential goals on the slide here. Okay, so the role of management practices are important here. We have to decide what kind of flexibility will fit with the HR strategy. What kind of flexibility will give the greatest leverage in the HC bridge? So we've got 3 categories of flexibility here as presented by Cascio and Boudreau. Accommodation-based flexibility. This is where it's targeted at individuals on an ad hoc basis, and which means as needs arise. Often it's not communicated to others within the organisation. The second type of flexibility is business-based flexibility, And this is policy based, and it's consistently applied across a group within the organisation. And so, for example, an hours scheduling system that has some built-in bank of flexible hours, and it's the same for everyone in a particular category of employment, such as customer service employees. The third type of flexibility is a culture of flexibility, and it's maybe more suited to a professional level work where it's widely flexible and known to be such. Results are rewarded with no emphasis on face time. So face time meaning being present, you're just measured on your outputs, not necessarily on being there and your inputs. But also remember that face time is really important and shouldn't be underestimated. It's important for building working relationships and establishing leadership roles and so on. So it's important, but it's also interesting to think about the balance of this and how much you need to see your employees to get the work done. Okay, so flexible work arrangements can mean choices in managing time, which means discretion over work hours and schedule. It can mean flex time and flex pace, so having time off in lieu, daily flexibility, shift work, working from home, etc. It could mean reduced time, such as working part-time, or time off with reasons such as family member illnesses, vacation work, volunteer work, etc. It could be caregiving leave, such as parental leave, or something becoming more common is leave to care for an elderly parent. There's also the issue of culture of flexibility. Does the culture support work-life balance, or does it put obstacles in place in terms of flexibility? Okay, on to analytics issues. So on page 182 to 183 of Cascio and Boudreau, they talk about IBM, Deloitte, etc. So the kinds of surveys reported for IBM, Deloitte, Touche and AstraZeneca have a problem with common method variance, I believe. So for example, employees who report being satisfied with the level of flexibility and work-life balance also report being satisfied with their jobs, but it's a common method used, being a survey tool. So it's not just method that's a problem here. It's also this idea of an unmeasured dispositional tendencies to respond in particular ways. I don't know if they measure disposition because they are firm surveys, but it's unlikely that they did. So this is also an issue. It should be noted that in a firm survey, and not for research purposes, you would not measure dispositions if you want to assess changes in the level of a variable such as job satisfaction. But to make claims about causality, such as they have here, disposition may be a spurious cause of the associations. Other analytics issues are things that we've talked about before, such as time lags, being cautious of where we measure these things, levels of analysis, looking at multi-level analyses, and also causal relationships and reverse causality, which have been covered in previous lectures. In terms of a level of analysis, this is an important issue, as we've discussed. And here's a reference to an article explaining this further if you're interested. The study by Bliss and Jex is a salutary warning to young players in the game of collecting data and trying to draw conclusions from it. How many of you are from time to time filling out surveys for your employer, workplace, wellbeing surveys, etc.? And how often in HR do we actually use instruments to measure variables such as job satisfaction? Bliss and Jex give quite a nice little simple example of a level of analysis effect in the use of data about stress at the individual and organisation group level. In the example they give on page 4, they report field observations that soldiers who work long hours often have negative psychological wellbeing outcomes. Total hours of work is a work-life balance issue, but when measured at the individual level, the correlation between work hours and psychological wellbeing was not strong, at negative 0.16, with a sample of 7,382 soldiers. You can see this correlation on the slide. At the military company level, looking at the relationship between mean work hours, being average work hours, and mean wellbeing outcomes, the relationship is very strong. Because mean work hours for the company was probably a better measure of work hours imposed by the organisation than was individual work hours, which can vary for many reasons, such as slackness, avoidance of family conflict, loneliness, career aspirations, etc. We're better to rely on the group level outcomes. This is a good example of why levels of analysis matter in understanding causal relationships and analytics. This is why it is difficult and not straightforward. If we were doing a work-life balance initiative in this military organisation, we probably would not have thought to look at the company unit level and do that analysis. We would automatically collect data and analyse that at the individual level, and we would have missed this strong effect. Cassio and Boudreau draw on a major longitudinal study from Singapore in another example here. They examine the relationship between work-life practices and firm performance. As you can see, they consider both the direct impact of work-life programs on firm performance and the indirect effect through employee turnover. Here are some of the results of the analysis. This shows that the greater the number of work-life benefits for management, the lower the voluntary management turnover, as shown by the negative 0.06 standardised coefficient. Then, in turn, the lower the management voluntary turnover, the higher the return on assets for the firm, as shown by the negative 2.15 standard coefficient. Therefore, the indirect effect of the number of work-life benefits for management on return on asset through employee turnover is positive. That is, negative 0.06 times negative 2.15 equals 0.129, so this can be rounded to a positive 0.13. However, note the cancelling out here. That positive 0.13 almost perfectly cancels out the negative 0.14 of the direct effect of number of work-life programs on return on asset. The beneficial effect mediated through reduced management turnover is cancelled out by an almost equal but negative direct effect on returns due to the costs of the program. Okay, let's look at other approaches to managing the pressure of work-life imbalance. So Jackson and Eloquet take yet another perspective on work-related stress, examining the role of effective time management behaviours in helping to reduce work-related stress. They point out that there is little evidence that time management training influences stress, and they set out to find some. The 4 stresses they look at could be seen as implicating time, such as role conflict, role overload, work-family conflict, family-work conflict. The 3 time management behaviours they consider are goal-setting, prioritisation, mechanics of time management, and the preference for organisation. The first finding was that goal setting / prioritisation and the preference for being organised are both important time management predictors. Their relationship with strain is partly mediated by their effect on feelings of control. Next, the impact of role overload or having too much to do was not moderated by time management behaviours. The relationship between work-family conflict and strain was the only one moderated by the time management behaviours, but it was actually stronger for those who reported higher levels of time management behaviour. That is, the use of time management behaviours did not attenuate the effect of this conflict on strain, as was expected. It actually made it worse. None of the other stressor effects on strain were moderated at all by time management behaviours. Perhaps setting goals and prioritising, as well as having a preference for being organised, brings into starker relief the work-family conflict. Note that this is the only stressor that is moderated at all by time management behaviours, that is, the strain due to the effect of work is having on family commitments. Let's talk about some takeaway messages from today. So Jackson Eloquet is another example of the complexity of analytics. One of the take-home messages from today is that analytics requires a lot of thought and a critical approach, and do not accept statistics at face value as evidence of causal relationships. At the same time, seeking data-based findings and further information before concluding the relationships exist at all is important. Our intuitions are not going to tell us whether the costs and benefits add up to a good idea for a HR intervention. Oops. Okay, so in class, we were looking at doing a class exercise on work-life programs and HR analytics, involving reading 2 hypothetical scenarios and developing a solution to each question. Hypothetical 1, you are a partner in a HR consulting firm. Your colleague was due to visit a new client firm tomorrow morning to follow up on an earlier initial meeting on their work-life balance project, which they would like professional help with from your firm. Your colleague is suddenly ill and has sent you an urgent text asking you to stand in for him at the meeting tomorrow morning. He is in hospital and not in a fit state to provide you with any further information. It is likely that you will have to take over his role in the project. The client does not want to defer tomorrow's meeting because some managers have flown in from interstate to attend, as it is part of a major culture change initiative. You are able to arrange to meet some key people at the client 1 hour ahead of the formal meeting to gather information. What will you ask them? Hypothetical 2. Your company drills for oil and gas from large drilling platforms on Australia's continental shelf. Drilling employees who work on the platforms are rotated by helicopter every 7 days on a 7-7 roster. This means 7 days on, 7 days off. In the context of a worldwide trend to longer rosters, your company announces that it will change to a 14-14 roster. This will reduce costs because each rotation is expensive. The employees take industrial action, claiming that the longer rosters will affect family life, cause greater fatigue, and increase the risk of accidents. How will you apply HR analytics to decide whether to go ahead with this intervention? I should let you know that this vignette here is based on an industrial stoppage that occurred quite some years ago on the Bass Strait oil rigs. At that time, there was an increasing trend to longer rosters. The handout you've received, and it's on LMS, is from a Workplace Express report of a current industrial issue. That trend to increasing length of rosters has reached its tolerable limit, and now unions are pushing to swing the pendulum back the other way. I would like you to take some time to think about this question and the issues involved after reading the handout. Okay, well done everyone. You've learned all about HR analytics and work-life programs. Next week we will have only one team presenting, looking at decision-making for a productivity intervention. Then the rest of the lecture we will spend discussing utility analysis, which is quite a large topic. See you then. Thank you.